My name is Andi, it's short for Andrea, in case that's confusing to anyone. And I did get my start doing this work at Bremo. How many of you know where that is? Oh, I like history, people. That's nice. How many of you know where Fluvanna is? Okay, good, excellent. It's a good start. So my dad was the caretaker. I went to high school at Fluvanna High School. Go Flukos. Took me a really long time to know what a Fluko was. But I did not think about the fact that that was a slave plantation until I was in college. And I took a class on Native American Studies, and I suddenly was like, wow, there's a whole lot of history I have not heard before. And suddenly it occurred to me that the people I went to high school with were probably descendants of the people who had been enslaved there, and I had never known that. I grew up playing in the slave cemetery at Bremo. I still love it. It's probably my favorite place on earth still. It's beautiful. But I didn't know anything about the people who built the place I lived. I just knew nothing. And finally it occurred to me that was pretty tragic and shameful in a way. So I did some research on Bremo when I was in college with some people from SUNY Potsdam. And I started looking at the archival records for medical data about how enslaved people were treated. Now, General Koch, Brigadier General in the War of 1812, so you have your sense of time here, did provide medical care for his people. That's good. His intentions, though, are, you want your people to be able to work, right? It's not sort of this good-hearted intention. You're trying to keep people laboring. And we found that at Bremo, though, people had a much longer life expectancy than at other places. And I'm happy to talk about that after if you're interested in more details. But that got me very invested in this work. And I went then to California, because I had a man that went to California, went with him. And I got a job at Stanford working for the Martin Luther King papers. And talk about another moment where I was like, holy crap, water hoses, dogs? Like, this is not something anybody has ever talked to me about. And I was literally researching 1960 in Dr. King's life, like 1 year. The King Papers comes out year by year in Dr. King's public life. And so I was having the pleasure of calling people like Harry Belafonte, who is very nice and has that lovely accent, so it was lovely to talk to him, but talking to them about civil rights history and knowing I just didn't know enough. I didn't know what I was talking about. So I kind of spent the next few years trying to learn things, and I came home in 2010 because my mother was sick, and I was taking care of her, and she passed away. And my father said to me, what would you like to do? What do you need to do what you want to do? And at the time I was an English professor at community college, which I loved, but I was working myself to death. And I was like, I really want to teach at a 4-year school, so I'm teaching a lighter course load and I can do research. So my dad said, stay with me for a year, I'll pay your bills, you write your book. So I wrote this book called The Slaves Have Names, which is about the people who were enslaved at Bremo. And that's how I kind of now fall into these projects around the area. So I give you that background to say, I do have a degree in history. I have a couple of graduate degrees that I'm still paying for in English, but I didn't come to this as a historian in the traditional way. I came to it through a place. And that matters when we talk about Birdwood. So how many of you know where Birdwood is? Oh, that's good. A lot of people don't. I didn't when I started the project. He says I'm supposed to call him my colleague, my supervisor, Frank, in the back. When I started, you may not know this, I had no idea where Birdwood was. I'm from Fluvanna, I'm from the other side. I knew where Crozet was, didn't really have a sense of Ivy, any of that. So I had to do some research. But what is important, and we'll talk about this in more detail as we go through here, is that this is one place. And there were dozens and dozens and dozens of people enslaved there. But that group of enslaved people was connected to all the plantations around it, and to places like Monticello and Highland, Sarah Von Harper's here, because we are talking about a Virginia that is not very populated. We are talking about a Virginia that is very class divided. So you have plantation owners, and you have working, we're not even going to go with middle class, working class people, and then you have enslaved people. Well, the plantation owners and the enslaved people often interacted with other plantation owners and enslaved people. So one of the things that's very important to me is that we think of these places and the people that lived on them as interconnected and not separate. And yet, they're very tied to the place that's here. So, oh, and by the way, this is the Birdwood House, I should say that, built by John Garth, completed in William Garth, completed in 1831. It now looks very different, Frank will be able to tell you, because it's under rehabilitation. So like those front steps are gone, the shrubs are a little smaller, and it's being beautifully renovated, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it is right off of 250, past the Bel Air Market on the left, where the golf course is, right? And if you go by there now, you'll see the big construction fence. And you can see at night, it looks really beautiful because the lights are all on, because it's gorgeous. I saw it just Sunday night, so. All right, so I'm going to give you the history of the land and the ownership of the land, because fortunately or unfortunately, mostly unfortunately, we have to start with the white history to be able to access the black history. So in the period of enslavement, as many of you guys know, black people were not legally citizens. So there's no real record keeping in any public records for most enslaved people. So the way we have to kind of get to their information is through the people who owned them. So, okay, we're gonna try to do this, Tom. Oh, it's loading. So there's an organization in this area called One Shared Story. Have you guys heard of them? They're amazing. They do a lot of work in the peripheral counties, as Albemarleans tend to think of us, right? Fluvanna, Louisa, Greene, Madison, Orange, Nelson. And they did this map for us. And we can give you the link afterwards if you want to see it yourself. But I want to show you guys a little bit about why when you talk about a place, it's difficult to narrow that place to a particular acreage or survey marks. I'll show you why. So the original Birdwood was started from a land grant. Oh, it's not showing you. Hold on. I'm going. Show me, Tom. Get me there. Thank you. We even went over this. So I'll just keep talking, right? So the original land grant was given to the Lewis family, of the Lewis family, right? In about 1725, 1730. It was huge, and it comprised this whole red area here, orange area. So this is the current golf course. This is sort of Birdwood proper. The big house is right here. And then this goes all the way back to Lewis Mountain, if that gives you guys some sense of things. So here's what Lewis and Terrell owned. The big blue area was all of their original land grant. So it's David Lewis and Joel Terrell. They were kinship through marriage. They owned that starting in 1734. And then James Lewis takes over the property, and it gets subdivided, right? Like we think of subdivisions as contemporary, but they're not. This is all happening at this time. And then Thomas Garth of Garth Road, Barracks Farm, Ivy Farm, basically everything from the Bel Air Market to Owensville Road, that Garth, he takes the land. And then it goes to John Dabney, of those Dabneys, of the famous Albemarle Dabneys. Then it goes to James Kerr, and then it goes to Horbrow's Trist, who has kinships to Jefferson and Monticello. And then it goes to Alexander Garrett. Do we know Alexander Garrett in the room? Some of us do, probably. Politician, clerk of court here. Pretty famous guy. Joseph Bishop then gets it. Then we get William Garth. This is when we start to really have like a plantation there. There are residences there throughout time. There are enslaved people there from the beginning of the land grant. But the Garth ownership is when it becomes the most measurable, because it's the first time we have a big building and people working at that big building. Then it just keeps going. Garth passes it on to his son, J. Woods Garth. And then after the Civil War, the property goes into a chancery case between granddaughters. It gets fought over for like 20 years. And then we have this long line of people like the Chamberlains and the Reinhardts and the Fondas, and now it's owned by the University of Virginia Foundation. So that gives you a general sense of how the land has changed. Well, not the land, but the survey marks. So, all right, we're going to try to do this, Tom. Going back. Oh, look, I got PowerPoint open again. You would think I didn't know how to use technology, but I do. Slideshow, there we go. Okay, so what we have going on now is that we're doing some research. We're trying to research the people who were enslaved at Birdwood from the time it became a land grant to 1865 for slavery, and then on into the 20th century. Because if you've done this work anywhere, I'm sorry, everyone online. I apologize. So if you've done this work anywhere, you know that often the patterns of enslavement continued into the 20th century. So people that were the descendants of people who were enslaved continued to work at these places. And that's the case here at Bremo for sure. Tom's just going to put it lower so I can't knock it over again. So we have done a ton of research, but before I start talking about what we've done, I want to thank people. So Sam's here, Sam Towler. Has just the best brain, just amazing. He's been so helpful. Shelley Murphy, some of you guys might know her. She's the person who's doing the genealogy for the enslaved laborers at UVA.
She's on Facebook.
Hi, Shelley. And Shelley is also the person that taught me how to do this. So, Bethany Bell, who was a grad student at UVA, and then Jane Smith, who knows everything about the daily progress from the dawn of time. So, and there's been a lot more people that have helped us. So Sarah Brown Harper, I could go on and on. But what we have done is we have looked at all the archival records and public records that we could find. We do not have any of the private papers of any of the owners of Birdwood. They may be somewhere, but they're not in public record. So if you guys know Garths that are interested, ask them to give me a call. I'd love to talk with them. We do know some Garths. We've had some really great interactions with some members of the living Garth family, but they're not people that had ownership of Birdwood. So we have some records that they actually gave to the Historical Society from Ivy Farm, which was owned by Garland Garth, who was William Garth's cousin. So we have some, but we don't have the exact papers that we need for Birdwood. So we've had to rely a lot more on public property records, like property taxes. We have looked at all of the related records in the Special Collections Library at UVA. We've done all the things. And we're making progress, but it's slow. When I did my research on Bremo, the Special Collections Library has 195 boxes of General Cox papers. I mean, he kept everything. Burlap receipts, notes about what he ate for dinner. It's a little like Jefferson in that way, right? Like just kind of kept everything. I mean, we don't have that here. So we've just been culling through everything we can find. All right, here's our definition of descendants for this work that we're doing. They are anyone with physical or labor ties to Birdwood from the time of the land grant into the 20th century. So if you lived there, worked there, anytime from 1734 to 1950, I mean, we'd even probably say if you lived there in the 1980s, we would be happy to include you. So we are looking at stepchildren, adopted children, foster children. We're not trying to do this on a blood kinship way. This is about a place and the people tied to it. And then we are looking at the people who are on other Garth properties. So like I said, it's basically the Bel Air Market to Owensville Road. So Eric's Farm, Ivy Farm, Garth Gate, Winding Garden, all of that property. If you go down North Road, all those Garth places, we're just trying to look at those as well and see how these communities tie. Because if you have white ownership by cousins, brothers, siblings, children, you end up with those enslaved communities being connected to one another. So we don't want to artificially try to separate families. That feels bad, right? We know what slavery did. So what we have found so far are 40 surnames for people who were enslaved at Birdwood Diane, there's some new ones on here. So I will let you guys read these. I won't read them all off, but you'll recognize some of them. The Gibbons, right? They are tied to Isabella at UVA. You might recognize Mayos from the Mayos that live here now, right? You might know Waits who live here now. Salmons, Jesse Scott Salmons, right? Who he and his wife helped found the Albemarle Training School. Elijah Shelton was a butler at Birdwood for the Chamberlain family in the 20th century. It's great. And the Carters, we're going to talk about a little bit right now because I don't have it in this presentation because I'm saving it. Frank's probably going to roll his eyes, but I want it to get special attention in the exhibits. We have a photo of two people named Juba and Amanda Carter. They are working at the Sunnyside Barbecue. Anybody heard of the Sunnyside Barbecue? It took place at the Duke Place, which is Sunnyside across from 7-Eleven on Barracks Road. That's how I tell everybody where it is. And after emancipation, they did these annual barbecues. And they had formerly enslaved people come and cook pigs. And in a photo that we have all the enslaved cooks, including Juba and Mandy, his wife, and all the white dudes sitting in the back. And so it's a great photo. But yeah, so these are the names. If these are names you know, if these are names of people you know of who might be interested, I would love to be connected to anybody that has ties to this place. Solomons are interesting. Some of us have a friend that's a Solomon, and that is Solomon Court on Hydraulic Road. That section of Hydraulic got settled by a lot of Birdwood people. Also, Georgetown, where Hessian Hills and all those are, that was all settled by people from Birdwood. So, yeah, it's good stuff. We can talk about all of this in detail afterwards, but I want to give you this one example. This is the Wright family. So, has anybody heard of William Dabney Maupin? Yeah, a couple of people, right? So, he's of the Maupins, of Whitehall, Maupin Farm, if you've been out that way, right? So he was enslaved by the White Maupins. And then his son, Oscar, and his son, Creasy, who's not named Maupin for reasons I haven't figured out yet, were all at Birdwood. So he marries in, Eliza was there, his wife, so he kind of marries into this family, into the population of Birdwood. And then you see, if we go down another generation, we have Willie Green Wright, with that great picture of her. Then this is more of the Wright family. So there's Willie at the top, right? Willie married William. I don't know. Doesn't seem, I want to choose a different name, but it was Willie and Willie. They got along really well, from what I hear from their family. And they had Luther Dunn Wright. Now there's a tie to a Luther Dunn and a white Luther Dunn, and we're trying to figure out what it is. But we haven't quite, is he named after him? Is there some sort of connection there? Luther marries Georgiana Jones, and then they have, 100,000 children, right? Including Sylvia Irene Wright, who is this nice, lovely woman in the picture there. Good hair in that one. And then Willie and Sylvia give birth to, Sylvia gives birth to her daughter, who gives birth to her daughter, and that woman is named Leslie Perry. And Leslie grew up on Georgetown Road. So we are only 4 generations away from the people that were enslaved at Birdwood. Leslie has been to Birdwood. We'll see a picture of her maybe in a minute. I can't remember if I've been, but we have gotten to walk around with her. We've gotten to talk to her. And when we have descendants to Birdwood now, we spend a lot of time just nodding, like just going, okay, so because people get talking to one another and we start hearing about family relations and people finding out they're cousins that didn't know they were cousins, or they know auntie so-and-so and uncle so-and-so. But Willie and Sylvia. So here's what we're doing continually now. We're still looking for much more information on the earlier communities at Birdwood. The Lewis and Terrells, we don't have any information yet about who they enslaved, but because to claim the land grant, they would have had to clear the land and put up a structure. We assume there were enslaved people there, we just don't know who they were yet. We are looking at those other Garth connections. We've had great connections with the Garths that live now at Ivy Farm. They've been lovely. They gave the ledger from the 18th century to the Historical Society. It's beautiful. We were looking at connections to other plantations. So J. Woods Garth, William Garth, who built Birdwood's son, owned Chestnut Ridge, across from Foxfield. Does that make sense to everybody? Trying to put you in the land here. And so we're trying to figure out whether the people at Chestnut Ridge had ties to Birdwood. And we're trying to research J. Woods Garth. He was kind of a scoundrel, kind of a fun little character if you want to look him up. But I always say that Frank's has a child named Woods, so he's a little scandalized. But then we're looking at connections to Mount Calvary Baptist, which is interesting. We just mentioned Alice Ivory here. She did the steeple in that church. That church is on Morgantown Road in Ivy. A lot of people went there. A lot of people went to Oak Union Baptist, which is on Owensville Road, kind of near the elementary school there. And then a lot of people, the Dwight Garths, and then some of their enslaved people also attended Olivet Presbyterian in Owensville, which is on Garth Road a little bit further west. We've had some ties to Mount Zion here in town. A couple ties to First Baptist that are a little looser, but churches are a place you can find people gathering. I mean now, but also a lot historically. So, the big reason we're doing this work is because we are trying to convene a group of descendants of the enslaved laborers to help inform us as we put forth a memorial to them at Birdwood. And we want to be, I say we, like I work for the UVA Foundation. I'm so fancy. I'm a contractor. I work from my desk in my kitchen. But we want to be respectful of the people who were enslaved there. We want to be respectful of their descendants. We want any kind of memorialization we do to be driven by what those descendants want and not by a tacit symbol that has no meaning but tries to do political work. That's not what we're trying to do. We don't want to recreate the UVA snafu of the plaque on the sidewalk. We want to do something meaningful. So this is the mission. And interestingly, tomorrow, the Descendants Council convenes for the first time. So we're super excited. I'm going to go home and try to sleep. I'm super excited. We have a descendant here, but I'll let her out herself if she wants to be known. Here's the thing I want to talk about you, because you guys are history people. I have a laptop. I'm sitting over there. On that laptop are research facts from 12 plantations in this area. Other people have looked at the research that I've looked at, but they haven't compiled it in the way I have. That information exists nowhere else in the world. If I don't have a backup of my laptop, it's gone. Shelley Murphy has way more than I do on her laptop. Sam has lots of information on his laptop and files, and Sam just has a lot of information. But we don't have any place to put it together. So we're trying to work with UVA, work with the Historical Society, talk about a database that will gather all of this information in a relational way so people can search it, find their families, find people maybe that they enslaved, people they were enslaved by, do these cousin connections that we do when we talk, but we can't do in research. So I always talk about the database because it's something that every researcher who does this wants, but it's an expensive, hard undertaking. So we're always trying to talk about it with people that might, if you're a database designer, feel free to come up later, tell me about yourself. But I would love to talk with you about what I've shared with you. I answer questions. I can answer questions about Birdwood. I can answer questions about general enslavement in Virginia. And I'm happy to talk with you guys about anything that you'd like.
That my grandmother, our grandmother,
yes,
who was born in 1900, was born at Birdwood, and that the house that she was born in still stands. I also know she was born in 1900, so that would have been Charles Edgar, I guess.
Yes. Yes.
However, she had other siblings. She was the oldest, and I do know that her sister Ruby. For a long time, we thought her middle name was Reinhardt.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all thought she was named after the owner of it.
Sure.
but we found out, I found out that that actually wasn't her middle name. But that was a family, that was
part of the story, yeah.
But I'm wondering, because my grandmother's father, my great-grandfather, died in 1820 at a very early age, living on another farm in the Ivy area. And that farm was a dairy farm, and I'm just really curious, what were the activities at Birdwood? Was it cattle? Was it dairy farm? Was it tobacco? Was it cotton? What do we know? What?
Yes and no. We can assume that it was, yes, all of those things on at least the subsistence level. But because we don't have records, like I can't tell whether they grew corn as their main crop or tobacco is unlikely, because by then people here had already figured out it depletes the land so badly. So by the 1830s, they're not doing as much tobacco. Again, they might be growing a little bit and selling it, but they're not growing it as their main cash crop. Weeds, probably. There was a lot of trouble with the Hessian fly and weed crops, and so you see that come up in things. But it seems to me that they were subsisting agriculturally, but we don't have any records showing they're selling off a lot. So they might just be living off their own means.
Well, yeah, my our great-grandfather was a farmer. So, when I think of that, I was thinking, well, he was out growing crops. But then, when he died in 1920, he was working on a dairy farm. And so I think, okay, well,
right.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. We don't know enough about the Garths as plantation owners to really know what they were growing. It would have been agricultural lands, at least some of it, but a lot of it would have still been forested. It wouldn't have been used. The land was sold so often because it was being used sort of as capital rather than as a useful farming mechanism. Unlike Monticello or even Bremo, where there were vast fields. That doesn't seem to have been the case in Birdwood. That's a good question. Yes, ma'am?
We hike there a lot, and there's that one small cemetery.
Yes.
And it doesn't have that many graves, 23 graves or something like that. But there must be and I assume it's strictly a white cemetery.
As far as we know.
Where are all the other people buried?
This is always the question, right? So Ben Ford has been doing a ton of archaeological work with Birdwood. He's the archaeologist on hand doing the renovation, so anytime there's digging, he comes in and makes sure we're not disturbing anything. He has a potential theory that there are enslaved people buried around that small family cemetery. So William Garth and his wife are buried in that cemetery, and other Garth family members. There's enough indication in the land, like in the undulations of the land, that make it look like there's graves there, but we haven't it's a big deal to do work on people's cemeteries, right? You want to be respectful. So that hasn't happened yet, but there is some conversation about doing some GPR or some work to see who else might be buried around there. There's likely also a location for an enslaved people cemetery somewhere at Birdwood, but the golf course came through and graded the land, and so we don't have any records that tell us where it was, and we don't have any more landscape records to show us where it was. So unless we come across something, we're kind of out of luck about finding any place else. That's a good question. Miss Ma'am?
Yes, I am delighted to be here tonight, in part for many reasons, but in part because I live in Bel Air.
Oh yeah, sure.
I live in the back of Bel Air,
Yeah.
on a road called Orchard Road. It's a spur road. It's on a ridge. Bel Air was subdivided. I think that Bel Air almost certainly had to be part of the Birdwood
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
When we moved into the house some long time ago, there were still a few rusty old apple trees.
Mm-hmm.
I am sure it was the Orchard Road, and probably the Orchard Road for Birdwood, in part because the only research I have done, I happen to work at UVA, so going over to special collections is not a big deal.
Yeah.
And one of the very few things that they have at special collections that was of any use in this was an auction flyer from the 1869 auction of Birdwood.
Yes.
And it makes mention of a very extensive orchard.
Yes.
So that first may have been part of what
Yes.
they were orcharding.
Sure.
And I realized at the start that the backyard that I mow almost certainly was worked by enslaved workers. And suddenly the world changed.
Yeah, sure.
So just to say, that is as far as I've gotten, but you are inclined to agree that the Bel Air tract from the maps that you showed us looked like it had, I can't imagine what else it was part of.
No, I mean, there's a great map by the Crittenden, Tom Sterling, the guy that did the land grant map.
Crab Hill.
Thank you.
Crab Hill.
I didn't
Yeah,
say
Crab
something.
Hill.
He did a wonderful map of the land grants, the original ones. You can find it online if you just search Albemarle land grants. You could see roughly where the survey marks are. I mean, we all know, right? The surveys from this time are like, you start at the tall sycamore with the crooked branch, and you walk to the 7th rock. You know, it's like not we don't have GPS at this point. So it's a little hard to get exact measurements, but I would think the way Bel Air is, Ednam, all of that.
It was all contiguous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be my guess.
There's a large copy of that map, actually, I think, the Historical Society.
Yeah, you probably do. And there's one at the clerk of court's office too, if you want
Well,
to see it.
the Family History Center also has one.
There you go. Excellent. Yeah, it's a great map. I have it on my wall. My 6-year-old goes, "What is all this?" And I'm like, "Well, let me tell you about land grants," and he just rolls his eyes. Are there transformers involved? I don't care.
So again, the name of that map?
Craybill?
Craybill.
Yeah, Craybill maps.
Spelled out.
Craybill, I think.
Crabhill.
Craybill.
Oh, Crabe Hill. There you go. And if you just search Albemarle land grant map, and you can buy a copy. He's very live and well, and he'll sell you a copy and ship it to you. It's nice. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about the public records that you use? You say there are very few private ones. So
Sure.
what are the publicly accessible
Yeah.
records?
So the golden document in my mind is the personal property taxes list from 1867 to 69. Sam can correct me if I get the years wrong. Sam is the one I just go to and go, "Sam, what is this?" And they list where people were working and what they were paying in property tax, right? So we have lists of who was at Birdwood in the years right after emancipation. So that's a really good record. And they have surnames, right? So a lot of the records, even in the family records, pre-emancipation, don't include surnames for people. So you're like, Big John and Little John is not enough for me to do genealogical research on, right? So when you can get a surname, it suddenly opens things up. So those are some of them. The 1870 census is another big one, because that's the first census that formerly enslaved people are recorded on. I use it to use those property tax names, look at the census, see if I can start putting together family lines. People move, they migrate with people they know. So a lot of people from Birdwood. Oh man, I'm bad with these microphones, dude, sorry. They move over to Georgetown. So you can look, and if you can find one person, you can see the names of other people who were enslaved at Birdwood are their neighbors over in Georgetown. We have looked at family records, Find a Grave. I use a lot of the data from Find a Grave so I can like pinpoint where somebody's buried. That's how I know where they were going to church usually. We have talked to churches. We have not yet convinced them of, I have not convinced them of my trustworthiness. Yeah, and that's okay. It's a long history of not being trustworthy, so we will get there. We have looked at diaries, books. There is a Garth family genealogical book. It mostly reads like the begats in the Bible, just so-and-so had so-and-so had so-and-so, but there are some essays in there. It's published in the 60s. We've used that. And then just like Edgar's book about Albemarle, right? Like looking at where roads were, trying to look at all of that stuff so we can start to put together the story. Yes, ma'am.
When you were talking about churches, as you're driving into Ivy,
Yes.
past Birdwood, you'll notice on the left-hand side of the road, there's a cemetery there.
Yes.
And that was originally a Baptist church.
Okay.
And that is where my great-grandfather and his brother and my grandmother's sister are all buried in unmarked graves. After, I think that particular church was absorbed into another Baptist church, and then it became a Pentecostal church, and somehow that church ended up being burned down. I've always wanted to see if I could get records for when it was the Baptist church, but I've never ever been known really where to look.
Go to the Historical Society.
Yeah.
They have a
I
lot.
think I probably did, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so church records ask if you know what church absorbed it.
I don't know what church absorbed
Yeah.
it. I mean, it would have been, obviously, I would guess, another Baptist church in the area.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I would check the Historical Society. They have lots of church records. When I was doing some research down in Esmont, they have the church records for the church, the first formal church in Albemarle, and they list the enslaved membership. So, like, you can look for stuff like that, and that's at the Historical Society. You might also look at special collections at UVA. They have, there's an archivist there, she's gonna kill me for giving her name out, Regina Rush. Yeah, she's amazing. She's an African-American woman from Esmont, from Porters, and she is just really knowledgeable about church records, in particular African-American records, so you could go and talk to her and see if she
I
can.
haven't been there to look for other things, when Reverend Neve, affiliated with the Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
So a lot of my family was in that Ivy
Yeah.
area, and my great-grandfather had a lot of brothers that were
Yeah.
serious.
That's cool. Well, come talk to me afterwards, and I'll get your confirmed to do that. Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Okay, we'll go to men now.
Have you done or followed the research such as the Lewis sold the property, they go to Rutherford County, North Carolina? Have you checked records in places?
Not yet.
Okay,
Because
well, I thought it was far down the line.
Yeah. It's one of those where it would be really nice to find something here, so I would have tangible things to take somewhere else.
Right.
For, like at Bremo, for example, these 195 boxes, he sent 37 of his enslaved people to Alabama. Well, I went to Alabama when I was researching and just scared the archivist by sobbing because I found a list of people who had walked there, right? But I knew who they were because I had a starting point here. So it's difficult to, if I don't have it here, to then move on. But yes, that would be really nice to be able to do that. Gentlemen, way in the back.
First, compliments to you as a professor and expert for starting with what you don't know, which is really cool.
It's a lot, yeah.
Yeah. We're recent escapees from Florida, where this would be considered woke.
Yes,
In many ways, have you run into resistance to this kind of research in funding, in public support?
Not with Birdwood, right, Frank? No, not with Birdwood. Birdwood's been wonderful. The UVA Foundation has been very responsive. Other places, yes. I grew up at Bremo, as I said. They are not real happy with me that I wrote a book, because it's still owned by the Koch family, right? It's descendants. Koch Hall at UVA, right? The people that own it now were like my teenage friends. They're not real keen on me. And it's not like I'm trying to shame anybody, it's just history, right? But it feels very personal to them, right? So that kind of, we've had some resistance. I did some work at Brackett's Farm in Louisa. There was a little bit of resistance there, just because of the politics of Louisa, right? Like, it's just a more conservative place, and they were a little more hesitant. But, by and large, unless the property is owned still by the people who enslaved people, they don't have that personal connection to it, right? I did work for John and Renee Grisham down in Southern Albemarle, and they asked me to come speak at their church. I'll just tell you the funny part of the story. I was doing fine when it was just Renee Grisham in the audience, and then John Grisham walked in, and I was like, I just couldn't even talk. My dad was there, he's like, keep talking. And they were wonderful. They had hired me to do this research because they wanted to memorialize the people who had been enslaved there. They were amazing. But even John, who did not own that property, I call him John, like we're buds. He had not owned that property historically. He bought it in the last 50 years. When I was talking about enslavement on their property name, he raised his hand and he said, no, not when we've owned it. I'm fairly sure we all know slavery ended in 1865, right? At least the legal one. So, I get more resistance. I think personally, I get more resistance to people who do think I'm being super political about it, but I don't see it that way. This is important history. It's part of our history. It's Black history, but it's all our history, right? I really want it to be, Diana and I were just talking the other day about how plantations are Black spaces. If you just do pure numbers, there were far more Black people on any plantation than there were white people, right? So it's just accurate history. And so I don't get a ton, but I do get a little bit. It's a good question. Yes, sir. This gentleman and this gentleman.
So have you seen any movement across 250 to farming?
Yes, I'm going to point you to Sam Towler. Sam, can you raise your hand, please? Sam knows all about Farmington. He's the person to talk to. But yes, there are some connections. Sorry, Sam. I'll give you his email address after. No, I'm just there is a connection to Farmington. There's some connections through the enslaved community. There's some connections through the Garths. There's some connections through mercantile, just business exchanges. There's some name connections too. So there definitely is, definitely is some connection there. Personally. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you. There was a remarkable exhibition a few years ago at the Special Collections Library of photographs of, I believe they were freed slaves.
Sure.
The narrative behind the collection was that this is how people wanted to be seen.
Sure.
They did not want to be known as formerly enslaved.
That's right.
They had their own sense of identity.
Sure, of course.
And I sense that the work you're doing is a very important step in uncovering more of that. But I'd be interested to know what you run across in the course of the very hard work you've been doing.
About individual people?
Yeah, that might kind of bring that humanity story more to the fore.
That kind of information is often in the private papers, right? So we'll hear, so at Birdwood it's harder to find. At Bremo, for example, the enslaved nurse there was a woman named Lucy Nicholas. We have Nicholases at Birdwood, so we're trying to make that connection. Lucy nursed the general's children, raised his children. She was the nanny of sorts at the time. When she died, General Cock and his daughter Sally were in Williamsburg. And they came back overnight on a carriage to come to her funeral. I don't say that to applaud them. I say that because I think that means Lucy was important. And she's buried next to Sally in the family cemetery, right? So, you get even now I get chilled off talking about it. You get that kind of stuff. I will say that at Bremo again, Lucy Skipwith was the enslaved school teacher. There was a slave school at Bremo. You were, contrary to popular belief, it was not illegal to educate slaves, it was illegal to hire someone to educate slaves, right? So if you did it yourself, nobody liked it, but it wasn't breaking the law. So he had one of his enslaved women teach. And she ended up going with those people to Alabama. And then she and a bunch of her family members and other people in that party wrote letters back to General Cock at Bremo. And they're compiled actually in a book called Dear Master, which is a brilliant book by Randall Miller. And in there, my favorite letter from Lucy says, "Oh, General, I know you want the boys to work all day." I'm paraphrasing. And then come to school at night, but they are so tired after they work all day. I know you want them to get their education, so could we please do school first? And she's like she's a good Southern master woman manipulator, right? She's telling him what he wants to hear because she knows that it's better for those kids, right? So, and Lucy's 3 times great granddaughter is the woman that integrated the schools in Cleveland, Ohio. You know, so you get these great stories, and all of the women in that family have been school teachers. You know, so there's that identity lasting, you know, for a very long time. Slavery was horrible, just unthinkably horrible. But the people that lived through it and survived it have more strength and beauty and perseverance than any other people I've known or talked to. They're just beautiful. So yeah, I mean, we really would like at Birdwood to find some more personal stories, and we're hoping through descendant connections we might. You know, people might have stories about their ancestors that we don't know yet, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. Sure. Yes, sir.
Thinking back to your list of last names.
Yes.
The Scots.
Yes.
Are these the fiddle-playing Scots, or is it a different group of Scots?
I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't know there were fiddle-playing Scots. So I did not know. I'm going to write down now fiddle-playing Scots. And then tomorrow I'll be like, were we talking about Scottish people?
I have entirely too much information about that.
Okay, well, I would love to hear it. So again, we're talking about a time when the population of Virginia is smaller. So, and you hear it all the time, right? I'm not related to those like shiftlets, right? Okay, I'm going to tell you now. All the shiftlets are from the same family. They just at some point one added an F, one dropped a T, but they're all the same family, right? In Fluvanna, Bowles, we have Bowles at Birdwood. Bowles is a white name and a black name. If you ask most of the white people in Fluvanna if their last name is Bowles, are they related to the black Bowles? They say no. But they're landkin, right? Like they're connected through a place of enslavement at some point, right? So the Scots would be my guess. Somewhere they're connected to the Scots of Scottsville and the Scots of all the Scott things, but I don't know the fiddle players, so it's good to know. Yes, ma'am.
So on the same similar note, I worked with a lady who had Childress in her family.
Yeah.
But they were down from like Esmond.
Well, and so what we also have here, and I haven't established it firmly enough yet to be definitive, but it looks like there's a migration of people from Birdwood Ivy to Esmond.
Okay.
2 quarters, because we have Simpsons, we have Yancey's,
Okay.
and those are all big Esmond names.
I have a Tucker Childress born in 1835.
It's not he's not here, it's Randall Childress here.
Okay.
But Tucker, there's a Tucker Coles, right, down in Esmond, and the Coles family owned 8 plantations in Esmond. So it's possible that Tucker took his name from Tucker Coles, right? So, yeah. Yes, ma'am, and then back to you.
Hi, this is so interesting. The work you're doing is so important. I live on a former plantation in Browns Cove, Brightberry. There's a big slave cemetery there. So we just had a burial there from a descendant last month.
That's amazing.
So it's active. But what I find, the young people that come and visit, the descendants, they want names. What you're doing is so important. They don't want a nice plaque saying, you know, that the people toiled and worked and died here. They come and they see the stones. And it's heartbreaking to see their response that there are no names anywhere. So we have a lot of Barbers and Howards and Thompsons.
Okay.
And I couldn't figure out the Thompson connection, but I looked up slave owners, white slave owners in Albemarle County about that time, and there was a huge Thompson slave owner, and a Brightberry Brown who built my house married a Thompson.
Yes.
And his mother was a Thompson.
Yeah, right.
So then I realized they would have brought slaves with that surname. They could have to Browns Cove.
Yes, sure.
And the Via family.
I'm sorry?
The Via family.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there are lots of Vies, so there's lots of good work being done, as Tom knows, in Browns Cove.
Yes.
And researching through the churches. But I use the Bell
the
website
JFL records,
all the time.
yes. That's another good public one. JFL is the African American Funeral Home. It's been here since the dawn of time, basically. But they've
merged a lot of the black undertakers records for Albemarle and Charlottesville into one database.
It's an amazing, and it's an easy to use database. It's
is
lovely. Yes.
Thank you for
Yes,
this.
thank you. I'm excited. This is my favorite. And the other public records that we were talking about, the Freedmen's Bureau records is another place I find a lot of information. Jay Garth was employing people from the Freedmen's Bureau and reporting them to the Freedmen's Bureau quite often. Freedmen's Bureau is also the place you'll find reports of people who were not treating their former enslaved people kindly. So just do that. Look at that with preparation in your heart, because it is not easy to see. Yes, ma'am.
Why Birdwood? What drew you to Birdwood? There are a lot of farms between Bremo and Birdwood.
I have a 6-year-old and I needed to buy groceries, and they were hiring someone. I do.
They actually were hiring.
Yes, they intentionally came.
Wanting this
Yes, yes, they came to me and asked me to do it. Yes, it's beautiful. And I do this work everywhere I've lived. I lived in Madison for a while. I now live in Crozet, but I live on 3 Notch. I can't. It's too hard to figure out. I'm like, just what Star Hill, tell me what we have here. But all my neighbors on that section, I live between Star Hill and the Crozet Market on 240, if you know where that is, and all my neighbors are black. So now I'm just starting, now I've owned enough cred to be like, can you tell me who your people are? You know, like, what are you talking about? So I do it everywhere, but, and that's the challenge, right? Like, we all have to make a living. And so, yeah. My kid likes chicken nuggets. So. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The house that we see is Birdwood, as you said, was what, 1830?
31, 29 to 31.
Before that, do you know of any structures that were, I know there's a little white stone building right behind it.
Yes, yeah.
Is that the earlier was?
So there were 2, until recently, just a few years ago, right, Frank? Like, there were 2 more late 19th century, early 20th century farmhouses that were kind of back by where that cemetery is, on the walking trails back there. They were taken down because they were dangerous. But where one of those was, we think was where the Lewis house was. But again, we don't have any records to prove that. And so that's what Ben Ford's theory is. So we know the Garths lived on the Birdwood property before they built this house. So we know they were living somewhere. We are assuming they're probably living in the old Lewis house, but nobody, we don't have social media. It would be really nice if all these people were on Facebook and I could like go back and be like, oh, this is the day you moved in 1842. We don't have that. So, but there were residences, and the white structure behind the house is, in my opinion, Frank's gonna smile, a slave quarter. But it's not definitive. But I will tell you that in all of the slave quarters I've been in, it looks just like that. It's 2 rooms with a central fireplace and 2 sleeping lofts above. It's been renovated since then. It's been used as it was a residence, a rental residence until just a few years ago. But it's being taken back to its original. So, but yeah, we haven't definitively proved it. But yes, it to me looks like
I think it's interesting because it is a stone structure.
It is a stone structure, and it's the common misconception is that slaves only lived in wooden structures, but all around here, the easier accessible material was stone and brick. A lot easier to get than wood. So at Brackett's Farm, all the slave quarters are brick. So at Bremo, they're PLA, right? Which, you know, so they're straw with plaster over the outside. Yeah. You're welcome. Other questions?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
who owns Birdwood now?
The UVA Foundation.
And then you said that there's like renovation happening.
Yes.
What's the long-term plan?
Oh Lord, we're gonna have to have Frank come talk. So the renovation of Birdwood is going to make it into a hospitality venue. Weddings, conferences, gatherings of various sorts. It is an expensive renovation. If you've ever owned an old house, it's not cheap to do these things. And so the only way to fund it is to have events there. We've had a lot of discussions about weddings and the appropriateness of that, but we're also all working with, we can either save it and use this as a vessel to tell this really large, beautiful story, or it can be torn down and then we run the risk of forgetting all these stories. And so, yeah. But that's the plan, and completion is set for 2025. So, and just in case somebody comes up, it's not open for public tours right now. Unless, hard hats, it's not that fun. But,
so they're doing a lot of archaeology now,
yeah.
Right? But they had done that before?
Yes, so they did a huge dig before they started any renovation. And now, anytime, they just found just the other day another a burn pit, which would have been like our, trash dumps. And so Ben Ford comes out and gathers any relevant material. They found a bullet the other day, a Civil War era bullet. So, and that's a great story, by the way. You can just Google it. Ada Bankhead in the 1920s, maybe 30s, wrote this great story about when she and her sisters were at Birdwood and the Union came through. It's a little exaggerated. It's not quite accurate, but we do know the Union came through, and so that's probably where the bullet came from. So, yeah, it's very active. I was just talking to the landscaper on site the other day, and she was saying, like, anytime she's going to plant something or take something out, she calls Ben and they look, because we don't have a real accurate record of what everything was or where it was over the history of the place.
Where will all those artifacts go to?
Well, there's going to be an interpretive display inside the house, so likely a lot of them will be there. Yeah. I'm waiting for Frank to go, no, but he's nodding, yes. Anything else? Well, I have on here, I always give everybody this. That's my email address. You're welcome to reach out. I'm happy to hear from anybody that has ties to Birdwood in any way. I'm happy to answer questions, and I have business cards and all that stuff. So thank you guys for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you all for coming out. Please come join us again for our next program. History is only a history if it's preserved and shared, and that's what we try to do. So join this Orbital Society, support us. Thank you very much.